Water was already gushing down the hillside, screaming through the tunnel like a freight train from hell when the first scream echoed from inside. That's when I knew someone from the HOA was still down there. Not my fault. I gave them warnings, permits, even geological assessments. They ignored every one of them. So when I finally sealed both ends and rerouted my spring-fed reservoir, let's just say what happened next wasn't technically my fault either. I didn't ask for any of this. When my uncle passed away, he left me something better than money: silence. His land was tucked into a pine-cradled ridge about 20 minutes from the nearest paved road. No cell towers, no streetlights, just the echo of hawks over the tree line and the sound of spring water spilling into the old stone reservoir he built by hand in the 1970s. There was a cabin, weathered but strong, with a deep well and 2 wood stoves that worked harder than I ever needed to. I'd wake up to deer in the yard, sip coffee on the porch overlooking the ridgeline, and fall asleep listening to owls trade gossip from branch to branch. That was my life. That's the life Karen Withers tried to erase with a tunnel. At first, it was subtle. I'd see SUVs parked just past the eastern tree line, the ones with the dealership stickers still on the windows. Surveyors with shiny hard hats and even shinier attitudes started popping up at the edge of the gravel road leading to my driveway, the kind that wouldn't wave back if you lit their clipboard on fire. I confronted one of them, a twitchy guy named Bryce, and he muttered something about Eagle Crest Heights expansion initiative before backpedaling into his white pickup and speeding off like I'd pulled a gun. I didn't think much of it at the time. I should have. Then the mail started coming. Glossy postcards with a photo of Karen herself, shoulder pads, blazer, and a $1,000 smile next to slogans like connecting community through modern infrastructure and Eagle Crest. The gateway to mountain living. At first, I laughed. Then I got the certified letter. Karen Withers, president of the Eagle Crest Heights HOA, was formally notifying me that my property was adjacent to a proposed infrastructure project designed to benefit the greater community through improved accessibility and emergency egress. That was bureaucratese, for we're drilling a tunnel straight through your goddamn mountain because our gated community hates taking the long way to the highway. Now, I've been called stubborn. My ex would say I'm constitutionally allergic to being told what to do. But I'm not unreasonable. I drove down to the HOA offices, a marble-fronted fortress that looked more like a country club than anything else, and asked for a meeting. They scheduled me 2 weeks out. When the day came, I showed up with maps, property surveys, environmental assessments, even an alternate route I'd traced that would spare the ridge entirely and still connect them to the highway. Karen listened for all of 12 minutes before she folded her hands, leaned forward across her glass desk and said, "This isn't about your property, it's about our future." That was the moment I knew. She wasn't going to stop. Not for facts, not for boundaries, not for reason. I left that meeting with the thick, cold understanding that this wasn't a debate, it was a declaration. Weeks later, heavy machinery rolled in. I came back from a supply run to find a surveyor's flag planted inside my tree line, and an excavator parked 10 feet from the old reservoir. I called the sheriff. He sent a deputy who shrugged and told me it wasn't his jurisdiction because the county had greenlit the easement. That was news to me. I pulled my deed, traced the property lines in thick red marker, and drove to the county recorder's office. There, a clerk named Dana gave me a tight smile and handed me a copy of the updated plat, one that showed a revised boundary line slicing through my ridge like a hot knife. "You'll want to take it up with the Planning Commission," she said. I did. I sat in a beige folding chair in a municipal building that smelled like mildew and waited 4 hours to speak to the commission chair, a leathery man named Boyd who couldn't look me in the eye for more than 3 seconds. "This all came through proper channels," he said, eyes darting to the framed photo of him standing next to Karen and the county mayor at last year's fall gala. "You should be proud. Your land's going to help a lot of people." I stared at him and said, "It's not going to help me." He didn't respond. 2 weeks later, the blasting began. The first explosion knocked my favorite coffee mug off the counter. The second cracked the drywall in the back bedroom. By the third, my spring started draining differently. I noticed it during one of my morning checks. The flow into the reservoir was lower than usual, and the sediment was cloudier. The pressure in the line dropped by 10% over the next week. I took measurements, tracked it daily. It wasn't just surface disturbance. They were slicing through the groundwater channels, rerouting veins that had fed this mountain for decades. I tried again. Sent certified letters to the HOA. Filed an emergency injunction. Karen responded with a PDF packet titled Community Benefit Statement, which included a full-color rendering of a scenic overlook where my cabin currently stood, labeled as optional future development. Optional, my ass. Blasting intensified. The rock falls began. Small ones at first, pebbles rolling down the switchback trail, a dust plume here and there. But then a boulder the size of a mattress tumbled 50 yards down the slope and stopped 5 feet from my water tank. I took video, sent it to the county. They told me they'd look into it. I sent it to the press. One online blog published it. The HOA dismissed it as sensationalism from an anti-development agitator. Then came the noise. Generators running all night, floodlights beaming through the trees, backhoes scraping against granite like nails on a chalkboard. It felt like they were trying to wear me down, make me leave. I didn't. I bought earplugs. I reinforced the foundation. I stopped using the well and switched entirely to spring water, what was left of it anyway. And then, one night, I noticed something strange. The north slope, the steep side of the ridge, the one that had never so much as shifted in a thunderstorm, had started to bow, not dramatically but enough. Tree roots snapped above the soil line. Boulders twitched in place. It was like the whole mountain was holding its breath. That's when I knew they weren't just digging a tunnel. They were unzipping the spine of the ridge, my ridge, and eventually something was going to give. And when it did, I wasn't going to be the only one buried under the consequences. But Karen didn't care. Karen had blueprints, investors, and champagne bottles already chilling for the ribbon cutting. The tunnel was halfway done, and to her, that meant it was as good as finished. To me, it meant one thing. If they wanted to keep pushing, I was going to start pushing back, not with noise, not with lawsuits, with leverage, geological, legal, strategic. Because if the HOA wanted a war, they just started one in my backyard. I didn't sleep the night the ridge bowed. Not really. I sat on the porch with a thermos of black coffee and a notebook in my lap, scribbling everything I could remember about the last 6 weeks. I wrote down each blast, each shift in water pressure, each accidental intrusion onto my land. I noted the night the air smelled like diesel, the morning the generator's echo carried all the way to the reservoir, the time I found a broken survey stake hammered into the pine stump where my grandfather carved his initials in 1961. Something had shifted, and not just in the soil. Karen had gone from ambitious to desperate. That made her dangerous. I needed eyes. The next morning, I drove to the feed store in town and bought 4 motion sensor trail cams, the kind hunters use to track bucks during rut season, and 2 used security cams from a pawn shop that hadn't changed its window display since the 90s. I mounted the trail cams on the main game paths that bordered the construction site, hidden in the brush and angled low. The security cams I wired to an old inverter rig in the loft and pointed directly at the tunnel mouth on the east face and the back road they were using to stage equipment. By sunset, I was watching grainy black and white feeds from my laptop in the cabin. Within 48 hours, I had footage. The first night, 2 workers dumped what looked like rebar and concrete debris directly into the creek that fed my spring. The next day, a flatbed unloaded PVC piping and directional valves less than 50 feet from my property line, no safety markings, no permits posted. I cross-referenced every activity with the county's posted project schedule. Not a single one matched. They were cutting corners, drilling without inspection, even laying lines through protected runoff zones. But that wasn't the worst part. On a hunch, I dug into an old geological survey that Uncle Ray kept rolled up behind the water heater. The kind of map they stopped printing when they realized it could actually scare people away from building on unstable terrain. It showed a fissure, a vein of metamorphic shale that crisscrossed beneath the ridge, including both my land and the eastern slope, where Eagle Crest's Phase 3 homes sat like glass chess pieces. Karen's tunnel didn't just scrape the edge of it, it bisected it, clean through. That kind of disruption didn't just risk undermining the ridge. It meant the whole damn slope could slide in a heavy rain, especially if they redirected water flow or rerouted runoff into the bedrock. I cross-checked with new USGS scans online. Sure enough, the fracture still existed, only now they called it a seismic advisory zone. And guess what? Eagle Crest never mentioned it in their environmental filings. I printed everything: photos, maps, diagrams, annotated with red pen, and my own water flow readings taken from the reservoir. Then I did what I should have done months earlier. I lawyered up. His name was Malcolm Brewer, a 50-something specialist in land and water rights who looked like he had been born in a courtroom and weaned on deposition transcripts. I met him at a diner 3 towns over and slid the entire folder across the table. He skimmed it in silence for 20 minutes, then said, "You're sitting on a goldmine of violations, but you're gonna need a scalpel, not a shotgun." That's when he told me about the 1912 clause. Buried in a land use document tied to an old logging charter, there was a single sentence that changed everything. All subterranean water channels originating west of the Kettle Line shall remain the protected utility of Parcel 113 until divestment by direct deed or federal seizure. Parcel 113 was my land. The spring wasn't just water, it was legally protected resource infrastructure. The tunnel cut through it. That gave me leverage. Not just for civil complaints, but criminal liability, environmental violations, and if I was lucky, federal injunction. I filed immediately. Sent notarized cease and desist notices to the HOA board, to their contractor, to Karen herself. They ignored every single one. Instead, they escalated. 2 days later, I found a violation notice pinned to my gate. Unauthorized land, use structure, potential code violation for non-standard reservoir lining. The HOA didn't have jurisdiction over my land. They knew that, but they also knew code enforcement officers didn't ask many questions before handing out 500 fines. I challenged it, of course. The fine was dropped. But the message was clear. They'd started playing dirty. Then came the noise complaints. A deputy showed up one afternoon to ask if I'd been hosting late-night parties. I asked if the deputy heard my nearest neighbor was a half-mile away and the only music I played was AM radio. He chuckled, apologized, and left. The next week, my mailbox was torn clean off its post. I replaced it with a steel box welded to a fence spike. The week after that, a pile of animal scat appeared on my porch. Looked like raccoon, until I got closer. It wasn't just scat. It was a full-grown, bloated raccoon carcass, belly up and rotting, dumped beside my water jug like a calling card. I checked the cams. They'd been blacked out. Power cut at the pole. That night, I reran the cabling through a buried line, added backups, and rigged a 12-volt alarm siren to the gate. I wasn't paranoid. I was outnumbered. The tunnel was nearing completion. They started load testing, which meant utility crews ran fiber optic and low-pressure gas lines into the tunnel in preparation for full integration with the Eagle Crest grid. Their newsletter said the tunnel would be active within 3 weeks, and that Mountain Pathway Phase 1 was ahead of schedule thanks to strategic partnerships and efficient land cooperation. Strategic partnerships. My ass. What they had was stolen earth, stolen water, and a ticking geological time bomb under their designer homes. I filed a second injunction, got a court date 5 weeks out. Too late. That's when I knew legal paths weren't going to stop them. They weren't afraid of fines. They weren't afraid of complaints, but they were afraid of exposure, of water, of nature's indifference. That's when I started Phase 1. I called it Operation Counterflow. Quietly, I ordered 2 custom-fabricated floodgates from a guy I used to know back when I helped build off-grid cabins in Idaho. Steel, reinforced, watertight, pressure-rated for 40 psi. Each gate had a collapsible locking plate designed to be installed inside a tunnel mouth or storm drain. I stored them in the loft under a pile of old metal sheeting. Next, I mapped out every runoff channel that had changed since the construction started. Turns out they hadn't just diverted my spring, they'd cut trenches through a watershed that spanned half the valley. I tracked the flow using dye tabs, the kind you can get from aquarium stores, and watched the trails bloom like neon veins down toward the tunnel site. Most of the flow still funneled through the spring basin, which meant I had control. And if I could direct that water, pressure it, elevate it, hold it, I could turn their precious tunnel into a pipeline they couldn't shut off. But first, I needed to be sure. So, I waited. I watched. I recorded. On the night of their first full load test, I captured video of 3 HOA board members walking through the tunnel in hard hats, checking blueprints, laughing. Karen was with them. She even posed for a photo beneath a string of work lights and said, "This is going to be a game changer." She was right, just not the way she thought. Because while they walked through that tunnel, I was upstream, diverting flow into a pressure chamber built from old culvert and PVC valves. I could control it, regulate it, or not. The first part of my plan was simple. Let them think they'd won, let them build right up to the edge, and then, when they flipped the switch, I'd flip mine. And the mountain, if it agreed with me, would take care of the rest. The certified letter I sent Karen was printed on heavyweight paper, the kind lawyers like because it sounds expensive when you slap it on a desk. Inside the envelope, my final cease and desist, notarized, time, stamped, and wrapped around the original 1,912 clause photocopied in triplicate. I included a flash drive with photos of the fractured vein, footage of illegal utility trenching, and a 20-second clip of a cracked PVC line leaking directly into the dry creek bed that used to be my spring. I hand-delivered it to the county office and paid extra to have it delivered with signature confirmation to Karen's personal residence at 4 Eagle Crest Loop. The beige stucco beast with the 3-car garage and faux copper lanterns. It arrived the next morning. I know because I watched the delivery guy walk up the cobblestone path and scan the label. But Karen never signed for it. 2 days passed, no reply, no email, no knock at the door, not even one of her signature glossy HOA leaflets dropped passive-aggressively in my mailbox. It was her way of telling me she was done talking. So I stopped talking too. I switched to tools. The tunnel was nearly complete. Their update said, subterranean activation imminent. Contractors were already running fiber optic cabling along the walls, painting safety stripes on the concrete. It was slick, industrial floodlights every 20 feet, power junctions tucked into recessed panels, motion sensors wired for future vehicle traffic. They'd even installed a commemorative plaque on the Eagle Crest end. The Withers Tunnel, connecting us all. It gleamed like a gravestone, perfect. The night they did their last pressure test, water, gas, and low-voltage lines humming with energy, I waited until 2:47 a.m. when their overnight crew packed up and left. Satisfied. They didn't post a guard, never had. They didn't think they needed one. They assumed the forest around them was empty, obedient, that no one was watching. I was. And I had 2 floodgates, 50 feet of chain, a winch, and 6 months of rage pressed into my spine like gunpowder. The first gate went in on the east mouth, the Eagle Crest side. I'd scouted the slope for weeks. There was a side access trail the workers used that looped down from the Overlook Road and passed through a maintenance access frame they'd cut into the rock wall. I slipped through there with the gate plate in a sled rig, dragged it across gravel and concrete, and locked it into the notched grooves I'd pre-carved with a carbide bit during a hiking trip the week before. It slid in like it belonged there. I used 2 bottle jacks to press the locking arms into the concrete, then sealed the seams with quick-setting hydraulic cement. By 4:11 a.m., the eastern end was sealed, 1 down. The second gate was harder. The west mouth, my side, was technically still under construction. They hadn't paved the access yet, just a wide gravel slope that ended in a cul-de-sac of chaos, hoses, crates, scrap, and power converters. I backed my rig down under the cover of cloud cover and fog, loaded the gate onto a dolly, and winched it into place beneath the unfinished vent arch. This one didn't need to be subtle, it needed to be solid. Once installed, I double-bolted the latches, welded crossbars over the interior handles, and hung a laminated sign on the outside. Warning: structural instability detected. Do not enter without supervisor clearance. Karen loved signs. She'd appreciate the irony. By sunrise, both ends of the tunnel were sealed, completely, and no one knew, not yet. Now came the fun part. The mountain spring, my spring, was running slower these days, thanks to their reckless trenching. But it still had teeth. I'd spent weeks redirecting its path through a custom-built aqueduct system carved from reclaimed culvert and pressure pipe, all feeding into a reinforced holding tank just above the tunnel's midline. I called it the Hammer. It held nearly 4.0 gallons when full, and when released through the bottom valve, that water had nowhere to go but down, directly into the tunnel bore. Normally, it would have drained harmlessly through their runoff ditches, but I'd sealed those too. Every outflow grate along the trench had been plugged with expandable foam and hydraulic sealant. By the time anyone noticed, it'd be too late. At precisely 3:07 p.m., I opened the valve. The mountain did the rest. Water surged into the tunnel with a sound like a beast inhaling. It didn't roar, it hissed. A creeping building pressure that echoed along the polished concrete walls like a warning in a language only rock understands. By 3:22 p.m., it had filled the midsection to the utility line. By 3:40, the tunnel was an underground river, and by 4:05, the first HOA truck arrived. It was a white Ford F-250 with the Eagle Crest logo on the door and Karen's nephew, Brent, at the wheel. I watched from the tree line, binoculars in one hand, walkie scanner in the other. Brent and two contractors, both in fresh polos with names like Josh and Chase probably, parked at the east mouth and got out. They looked annoyed. Brent kicked a rock. Josh checked a clipboard. Chase unlocked the gate latch, the one I'd purposefully not welded shut. When the gate didn't move, Brent stepped forward and gave it a hard tug. Nothing. Then Chase bent down and noticed the water seeping from the bottom corner. I wish I could describe the look on his face. They scrambled, called someone. I heard Karen's voice on the scanner, high-pitched and barking. "It's just runoff. Tell them to clear the drain system. We can't have a delay this close to activation." Of course she'd say that. She still thought she was in control. That's the thing about water, it doesn't take orders. At 4:23 p.m., Brent overrode the locking mechanism. They got it half open. Water blasted out with enough force to knock all three of them backward. One of them, Josh, I think, slipped and fell into the flow, which at that point was running at over 60 gallons per second. He slid backward into the tunnel screaming, arms flailing, before disappearing into the dim corridor like a bowling pin down a flooded alley. Brent followed him, yelling. Chase hesitated, then ran in after both of them. That's when I closed the valve. The water kept flowing for another minute, enough to fill the low point of the tunnel again, enough to cut the light, enough to remind them what pressure feels like when it has nowhere to go. By 4:37, the backup was complete. The gates held. The tunnel was a tomb of trapped air, rising water, and three very, very unlucky men. I hiked down to my cabin and waited. At 5:11 p.m., sirens echoed through the valley. Rescue trucks, sheriff cruisers, a water rescue unit from the next county. Karen arrived last, in a Lexus SUV that somehow always looked freshly waxed, even on a dirt road. She wore heels, to a flood, typical. I watched from the upper path as crews fumbled with hoses, generators, even tried pumping the tunnel out. One guy in full fire gear slipped on the slick entrance and nearly cracked his head open. Another screamed at a supervisor about unsafe interior pressure zones. Karen stood off to the side, arguing into her phone. She was pissed, she was panicking. And for the first time, she looked powerless. They eventually got them out. Brent had a busted collarbone. Chase swallowed half a gallon of silt water. Josh had hypothermia and a concussion, but they were alive mostly. Just wet, cold, and shaken. Karen blamed a natural groundwater swell, then tried to muzzle the press with a prepared statement about unforeseen hydrostatic complications. But the damage was done. The tunnel was flooded. The press was there. Her nephew was on painkillers and rambling about how the mountain tried to eat us. And I hadn't lifted a finger since breakfast. Everything I'd done was legal. Strategic, contained to my land. I'd sealed my own runoff paths, redirected my own spring, and sent a warning she refused to heed. This wasn't sabotage. It was self-defense of the oldest kind. Karen just never realized that when you dig a hole through someone's mountain, you'd better ask what lives in it first. Because sometimes the answer is water. And sometimes the answer is me. It didn't take long for things to get biblical. Less than 24 hours after the tunnel flooded, the mountain reminded everyone who was actually in charge. It started with a dull groan, not quite a quake, but something deeper, older, like the land itself was cracking its knuckles. The engineers called it structural stress redistribution. The rest of us called it the collapse. 1 minute, the east side of the tunnel was being pumped out by a frantic crew with a half-dozen diesel generators. The next, a 50-foot section near the midpoint gave out with the kind of violence that makes grown men drop their radios and run. 1 moment, flashing lights, hard hats, and bureaucratic shouting. The next, a thunderclap of rock, water, and steel imploding into itself like a sinkhole in fast forward. The tunnel didn't just fill with water, it imploded. Concrete cracked. Rebar twisted like licorice, whole sections buckled inward like a soda can under a boot heel. But that wasn't the main event. The main event happened 3 hours later when the pressure found a new outlet, directly beneath Eagle Crest Loop. See, the HOA's precious tunnel hadn't just destabilized my spring. It had also weakened the already shaky shale shelf beneath their upper road. When the backup pressure shifted post-collapse, it didn't just settle, it surged. Water surged sideways, carving out voids beneath the concrete foundations of 2 houses perched at the tunnel's apex. One of those homes was an ultra-modern, glass-paneled monstrosity with a copper roof and a meditation deck. Karen's house. The other belonged to HOA treasurer Marcus Beale, the one who used to brag about his private wine cellar with passive climate control. Both houses cracked, tilted, and then partially sank into the earth like ships taking on water. Not fast, not cinematic. Slow, painful, foundations groaned, lawns sheared at strange angles, and decks splintered. A retaining wall gave out with a splatter of mud and half a koi pond. The media was on it like wolves. Local news choppers were circling within the hour, capturing sweeping aerial shots of 2 luxury homes half swallowed by a mountain, their rooftops tilted like sunken hats. The caption on Channel 4 read, "Eagle Crest Disaster, Tunnel Collapse Triggers Landslide." By morning, CNN had picked it up, so had the environmental watchdog blogs. You know the ones, run by scrappy ex-foresters with Wi-Fi and grudges. Within 2 days, my inbox was on fire. Reporters, lawyers, citizen scientists, podcasters. Everyone wanted a quote. I stayed quiet until the hearing. Karen tried to spin it at first. Claimed unseasonal saturation, unexpected aquifer pressure, and acts of God. But the moment I saw the county board's docket update include a subpoena for full disclosure of HOA construction practices, I knew the tide had turned. I waited until they were all in the same room, county engineers, state geologists, HOA board members, and a dozen furious Eagle Crest residents with clipboards and insurance adjusters in tow. Before I made my move, I handed each board member a flash drive, everyone labeled with my neat permanent marker scrawl: water rights, geological risk, tunnel timeline, camera footage, incident logs. Then I stood up, walked to the mic, and calmly said, I warned them. I warned them 6 times. I filed 4 injunctions. I submitted geological evidence, historical water rights claims, and structural assessments, all ignored. Then I pressed play on the TV. I had edited together a 20-minute presentation. It opened with drone footage of the property pre-blasting, lush trees, clean springs, deer on the ridgeline. Then came the security cam footage. Trucks dumping debris, illegal trenching, nighttime trespassing, Karen directing traffic, Brent holding a blueprint. Then came the collapse. Footage from a distant ridge cam showing the tunnel folding into itself like a sinkhole had swallowed a train track. The last 5 minutes were just hard data. Geological overlays, spring pressure logs, seismic activity spikes, all time-stamped to HOA construction days. Then the kicker, a narrated timeline, complete with certified mail receipts and ignored cease and desist orders. It ended with a still frame of the 1912 clause, bolded in red. All subterranean water channels originating west of the Kettle Line shall remain the protected utility of Parcel 113. When the lights came back on, no one said a word for a full 5 seconds. Then, someone in the back clapped. Then more. Then it turned into a slow, angry round of applause, the kind that doesn't celebrate, the kind that condemns. Karen tried to respond. Claimed I had doctored footage, that the collapse was sabotage, and that I was a hostile actor targeting the HOA. That was her last mistake. Because sitting 2 rows behind her was Brent, her own nephew, still in a sling, jaw clenched tight. When the board asked if he wanted to make a statement, he stood, cleared his throat, and said, "She knew, she saw all of it. She told us to ignore it, said he was bluffing. Said the tunnel would be open by the 4th of July no matter what." That was the moment the last thread snapped. Karen Withers was removed from her post the next day. By week's end, she was under investigation for multiple counts of fraud, bribery, and violation of public safety codes. Turns out she'd falsified at least 3 planning documents, doctored an environmental review report, and fast-tracked county approval through a golf buddy she loaned $50,000 during a political campaign. Her home was condemned. Insurance wouldn't touch it, neither would any buyer. She tried listing it at $1.2 million. It sold 7 months later for $750,000 under market to a real estate holding company that raised it to the slab. The HOA didn't survive either. With 2 board members under legal scrutiny and a dozen lawsuits pending from angry homeowners who suddenly found cracks in their foundations, they called an emergency vote and dissolved the entire board. The newsletter stopped, the fines stopped, the neighborhood signs came down. By the end of the year, Eagle Crest Heights was just another unincorporated zip code with inflated mortgages and no governing body. Just like that, the machine sputtered to a halt. Meanwhile, I got to work. The spring basin, the one they tried to reroute, choke, and drain, I restored it, dug out the silt, resealed the old culverts, planted willow saplings and native moss. Let the reservoir refill at its own pace. By late summer, the water was clear enough to see the trout again, fingerlings now, but growing. I built a small observation deck overlooking the stream where the old trail met the rocks. Just a chair, a railing, and a view that stretched from the ridge to the valley floor. No tunnel, no traffic. No HOA. And on the post beside the trail, just under the cabin's nameplate, I mounted a new sign. Simple wood, carved by hand, letters burned deep into the grain. Trespassers will be rerouted underground. I sip my coffee there most mornings now, watch the sun catch the ripples, listen to the wind tug at the pines. Sometimes a neighbor from town hikes up and asks about the old tunnel. I tell them the same thing every time. It was a shortcut they were never meant to take. And some mountains don't like being carved open.